blood-curdling alien screams normally meant an ambush, but today they echoed from the mess hall. Elite extraterrestrial warlords, conquerors of a dozen star systems, stood completely paralyzed, weapons drawn and mandibles trembling, utterly terrified by what a human corporal casually poured over her morning scrambled eggs. Dust storms on Groombridge 34 rarely subsided, whipping red silicate across the reinforced titanium bulkheads of Forward Operating Base Bastion. Inside the sprawling military complex, an unprecedented and highly unstable alliance was attempting to function. Earth's United Nations Marine Corps had been stationed alongside the fearsome Craxian Ascendancy, a brutally efficient insectoid reptilian species whose empire spanned half the Orion Spur. The joint operation was a desperate measure to repel a mutual threat, but the cultural friction between the two species was thick enough to cut with a plasma cutter. Commander Akos Black stood before the thick armor-glass window of his command module, watching the twin suns rise over the barren landscape. Akos was a veteran of the Sirius campaigns, a man whose face bore the jagged, pale scars of plasma burns and close-quarters combat. Yet dealing with the Craxian warlords was proving to be the most exhausting diplomatic assignment of his career. The Craxians respected exactly one thing: physical dominance. To a Craxian, humanity was a cosmic joke. Humans possessed no natural exoskeletons, no venom glands, no redundant organ systems, and our sensory capabilities were pitifully narrow compared to their hyper-evolved biometrics. General Vargas, the supreme commander of the Craxian vanguard, made no secret of his disdain. Standing 9 feet tall, entirely encased in a naturally occurring, diamond-hard chitin that gleamed like polished obsidian, Vargas viewed the humans as frail auxiliaries, useful only for absorbing enemy fire while the true warriors flanked. Akos turned away from the window and rubbed his temples. The previous night had been a grueling 12-hour defensive shift against the local fauna of vicious, subterranean predators that the Craxians dispatched with brutal, mechanical efficiency, while the humans relied on heavy munitions and sweat. The human soldiers were exhausted, running on fumes and sheer spite. Sergeant Chantel Atwood pushed past the magnetic seal of the command module, her heavy combat boots clanking against the grated floor. Atwood was a former heavy machinery mechanic from Houston, Texas, who had traded turning wrenches on John Deere industrial harvesters for operating military-grade railguns. Her armor was scorched, and dark circles framed her fierce, unyielding eyes. "Morning, Commander," Chantel grunted, tossing a datapad onto the aluminum briefing table. "Perimeter is secure. The Craxians are already running their morning combat simulations." General Vargas sent a runner to remind us that we are 20.4 seconds behind the optimal daily schedule. Akos sighed, crossing his arms over his chest plate. Of course he did. Vargas wouldn't know a rest cycle if it hit him with a kinetic strike. "How are the men?" "Tired, sir," Chantel replied, running a hand through her dust-caked hair. "Morale is holding, but barely. The aliens looking at us like we're walking meat sacks isn't helping. We need a win. Or at least, we need them to stop treating us like toddlers who wandered onto a battlefield. Respect is earned in blood with their kind, Sergeant. We just haven't bled the right way yet." Akos checked his chronometer. "Let's head to the mess hall. We have a joint tactical briefing with Vargas and his high command in 20 minutes. I want hot food in our stomachs before we have to endure another lecture on Craxian biological superiority." The walk to the mess hall took them through the central artery of the base. The stark contrast between the two militaries was evident everywhere. Craxian warriors stood at perfect attention, their multifaceted eyes tracking the humans with cold, calculating indifference. Their weapons, organically grown from a metallic alloy secreted by their own bodies, hummed with contained energy. In contrast, the human Marines were slumped against bulkheads, trading jokes, cleaning their mass-produced Lockheed Martin pulse rifles, and desperately trying to stay awake. The joint mess hall was a cavernous dome, theoretically designed to foster unity. In practice, it was deeply segregated. The Craxians occupied the eastern hemisphere, standing in perfectly aligned rows. They did not sit. They consumed their rations, perfectly calibrated, gray cubes of synthesized proteins and essential amino acids in complete silence. The cubes were odorless, tasteless, and provided exactly the caloric intake required for peak lethality. To the Craxians, food was fuel, nothing more. The concept of eating for pleasure was a biological inefficiency they had bred out of their species millennia ago. Akos and Chantel approached the human side, where the smell of rehydrated, powdered eggs and vacuum-sealed sausage links filled the air. It was a meager feast, standard-issue military MREs, but it was a slice of home. Commander Chief Medical Officer Diedrich Kim greeted them as they grabbed their metal trays. Diedrich was a brilliant trauma surgeon who had spent the last 3 weeks trying to understand Craxian physiology, mostly resulting in extreme migraines. "You look like hell. Both of you." "Flattery will get you nowhere, Doc," Chantel shot back, dumping a generous portion of yellow rubbery eggs onto her tray. "Tell me you brought the good stuff. If I have to eat another meal that tastes like recycled cardboard, I'm going to start biting the aliens." Akos reached into the deep cargo pocket of his tactical trousers. "I brought something better than good, Sergeant. I brought salvation." He pulled out an unassuming foil bag. The label was worn, but the bold letters were still legible. Death Wish Coffee. It was a pound of whole Robusta beans, famously sourced from the volcanic soils of Central America on Earth, genetically untouched and naturally boasting double the caffeine content of standard commercial blends. Akos also retrieved a battered stainless steel French press and a portable battery-operated water heater. Diedrich's eyes widened behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Where did you get that? Command outlawed unsanctioned organic imports 3 sectors ago." "I have friends in logistics," Akos said with a faint smirk. "And right now, I don't care about regulations. I need to be awake to deal with Vargas. Set up the table, Doc. It's time to brew." Unbeknownst to the human trio, across the vast expanse of the mess hall, the Craxian internal biometric sensors were beginning to ping. The aliens, equipped with olfactory receptors capable of detecting a single molecule of pheromone from a mile away, were about to experience Earth's morning ritual. General Vargas towered at the head of the Craxian vanguard, his mandibles clicking a rhythmic pattern of pure disdain. To his hyper-evolved ocular receptors, the human contingent across the mess hall was a chaotic smear of fluctuating thermal signatures and wildly erratic heartbeats. He turned to Xylar, his chief science officer. "Observe them." Vargas communicated through a secure, subvocal sequence of pheromones and clicks. They move with agonizing inefficiency. Their energy output is inconsistent. They require constant hydration and rely entirely on external, crude weaponry. Why the High Council mandated this alliance with Deathworlders defies all tactical logic. Xylar adjusted the biometric bracer on his chitinous forearm, recalibrating the atmospheric sensors. Their homeworld, Earth, is a Class 9 Deathworld, General. The gravity is crushing, the meteorology is violently unstable, and the biosphere is aggressively predatory. The Council hypothesizes that surviving such a crucible indicates a latent, unquantifiable resilience. "Resilience is the coward's word for stubbornness," Vargas sneered, his armored plating shifting. "They are fragile. A single kinetic strike to their unprotected cranial structures, and they expire. They possess 0 natural defenses." A sharp, piercing whine suddenly erupted from Xylar's bracer. The science officer's multifaceted eyes dilated in absolute alarm. His claws danced frantically across the holographic interface, processing the sudden influx of atmospheric data. "General!" Xylar hissed, his mandibles flaring wide. "Sensors are detecting a catastrophic spike in aerosolized toxins. A highly volatile alkaloid compound is rapidly saturating the ventilation system. The origin point is the human command table." Vargas instantly stiffened, combat pheromones flooding the air. 300 Craxian warriors reacted as one, their organic armor plates snapping into lockdown, weapons humming to life. A biochemical attack? Have the Xyloc breached the perimeter? Or is this an assassination attempt? Negative, General. It is localized entirely among the humans. Xylar pulled up a glowing red molecular model. By the ancestors. It is 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine. A devastating neurological disruptor. In our physiology, and the physiology of 90% of the known galaxy, This compound binds irreversibly to the central nervous system. It triggers massive neuroelectrical storms, instantaneous cardiac arrest, and violent cellular disintegration. Vargas's grip on his plasma lance tightened. Are they initiating a suicide protocol to take us out with them? Oblivious to the escalating terror across the room, Commander Akos Black pressed the plunger down on his battered French press. The dark, viscous liquid swirled within the glass, releasing a thick plume of steam. The rich, heavily roasted aroma of dark coffee permeated the air. To Akos, it was the smell of salvation. It was the only thing standing between him and total collapse. He poured the black liquid into his aluminum mug. "God, that smells beautiful," he muttered, closing his eyes. "Save some for me, Commander," Sergeant Chantel Atwood said, holding out her canteen cup. "I need my engine revved." Dr. Diedrich Kim poured a modest half cup, eyeing Akos. Technically, consuming this much concentrated caffeine on an empty stomach after 24 hours of combat is going to catastrophically spike your cortisol levels. "Doc, if I don't drink this, my cortisol levels are going to physically manifest and punch General Vargas in his giant insect face," Akos replied dryly. Before the mug could reach Akos's lips, a deafening screech ripped through the hall. "Halt!" General Vargas crossed the mess hall in 3 massive bounds, the floor plates groaning under his weight. A dozen royal guards flanked him, their plasma lances humming with lethal, searing heat aimed squarely at Akos's coffee mug. The human contingent froze. Marines dropped their synthetic rations, hands drifting instinctively to their sidearms. The air in the mess hall turned thick and suffocating. Akos slowly lowered his mug, his hands perfectly steady. "General Vargas, is there a problem? We are in the middle of our meal cycle." Vargas glared down at the human, mandibles trembling with rage. "Do not feign ignorance, Commander. Our sensors have detected a lethal concentration of a Class A neurotoxin emitting from that vessel. Deploying a suicide weapon in a joint facility violates every fundamental treaty between our species." Akos blinked. He looked at Vargas, then at the heavily armed guards, and finally down at his morning coffee. He glanced at Diedrich, who was violently suppressing a nervous laugh. "General," Akos said, deliberately keeping his voice level, "I assure you, this is not a weapon." Xylar stepped cautiously out from behind Vargas, his datapad pulsing an angry red. "Do not lie. The spectral analysis is undeniable. It is a biological defense mechanism evolved by flora to paralyze and execute insects and small herbivores. Exposure to a mere fraction of a milligram in its pure form would send a Craxian into irreversible, agonizing shock." Akos processed the alien's frantic explanation. Earth plants had indeed evolved caffeine as a natural pesticide to kill bugs, giant alien bugs. "Xylar, General," Akos said, slowly lifting the mug again. "You are scientifically correct. It is a defense mechanism developed by our homeworld's flora to kill insects." Vargas's plasma lance whined, the energy matrix intensifying. "Then you confess. Put the toxin down and surrender to quarantine." "It's not a weapon for us, General," Chantel interjected, leaning back in her chair with terrifying casualness. "It's breakfast." Before Vargas could bark an order to fire, Akos locked eyes with the towering warlord. He raised the mug in a mock salute, tilted his head back, and took a long, deliberate gulp of the scalding black liquid. The Craxian guards physically recoiled, staggering backward in unadulterated horror. Xylar's datapad slipped from his grasp, his mandibles falling completely slack. He ingested it," Xylar whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and grotesque fascination. "Direct oral consumption. The thermal reading is near boiling, yet his internal organs remain intact. General, his cardiovascular output is elevating, but he is not entering cardiac arrest. He is metabolizing the neurotoxin." Akos swallowed, letting out a heavy, satisfied sigh. The caffeine hit his exhausted nervous system like a kinetic strike, sharpening his vision and instantly burning away the fog of war. He set the mug down with a sharp clack. "I needed that." Now, General, if you wouldn't mind having your men lower their weapons, you're interrupting Sergeant Atwood meal. Vargas stared at Akos as if the human had just unhinged his jaw and swallowed a live thermal detonator. The Craxian commander slowly, shakily, signaled his guards to stand down, their optical sensors locked onto the coffee mug. You consume deadly neurotoxins. Voluntarily? Vargas asked, his booming voice stripped of its arrogance, replaced by profound, unsettling confusion. It's a stimulant, General Diedrich explained, adjusting his glasses. The human nervous system is robust. What kills a lesser organism merely blocks our adenosine receptors, preventing fatigue. We drink it to wake up. The Craxians exchanged silent, horrified glances. They were conquerors, masters of martial combat, but the concept of drinking literal poison just to shake off morning drowsiness was a degree of biological insanity they had never conceived. Remarkable, Xylar muttered, frantically logging the data. Their biology takes a lethal chemical weapon and utilizes it as a mundane performance enhancer. General, I must fundamentally rewrite our assessment of human physiology. Vargas stood rigid, a newfound, deeply reluctant wariness settling over him. Very well, Commander Black. We shall leave you to your toxic rituals. But ensure your hazardous materials do not spill. I will not have my warriors dying because a human fumbled his beverage. As the Craxians slowly backed away, treating the humans like unexploded ordnance, Akos took another sip. Well, Akos said quietly, that went better than expected. Chantel smirked, reaching into her tactical pouch. If they thought the coffee was bad, wait until they see what I brought to fix these dry eggs. The mess hall had settled into a tense, vibrating silence. The Craxian warriors had returned to their side of the dome, but all pretense of ignoring the humans was gone. Hundreds of alien eyes were fixed firmly on Akos's table. Xylar had practically commandeered a nearby structural pillar, leaning around it to aim a sophisticated array of scanning equipment directly at the human trio. Chantel Atwood, completely unfazed by the extraterrestrial surveillance, was focused entirely on her metallic tray. The rehydrated powdered eggs were a pale, depressing yellow, sitting beside a slab of mystery meat that looked more like compressed synthetic rubber than anything derived from an animal. I swear, whoever designed standard-issue MREs hates joy, Chantel muttered. She reached into the depths of her heavily modified tactical rig and retrieved a small, unassuming glass bottle with a black cap. The label was a vibrant, aggressive mix of crimson and yellow, featuring an illustration of a flaming skull. Akos raised an eyebrow. Is that what I think it is, Sergeant? Yes, sir, Chantel grinned, tapping the glass. Smokin' Ed's Carolina Reaper sauce. Directly imported from Fort Hood, Texas. A buddy of mine in supply smuggled a whole crate onto the transport before we jumped to this rock. It's got a Scoville rating of roughly 2.2 million. Diedrich, halfway through his coffee, nearly choked. Chantel, are you insane? 2 million Scovilles? That's not a condiment. That's military-grade pepper spray. It's concentrated capsaicin. You're going to burn a hole through your esophageal lining. Doc, I survived 3 tours in the Outer Rim, and I grew up in Houston. My digestive tract is lined with lead. I need to feel something other than the impending dread of dying on this dust ball. Chantel unscrewed the black plastic cap. The moment the hermetic seal was broken, the pungent, acidic aroma of fermented Carolina Reaper peppers, distilled vinegar, and raw capsaicin oil hit the air. To a human, it was a sharp, eye-watering scent that promised culinary pain. To the highly sensitive, hyper-tuned Craxian environmental sensors monitoring the room, it registered as an apocalyptic event. Sirens immediately began to wail. Blinding red emergency strobe lights rotated violently from the ceiling of the mess hall. The base's automated AI voice, a calm, synthetic female tone, cut through the blaring alarms. Warning. Category 9 biochemical hazard detected in Sector 4. Corrosive airborne agent localized. Initiating emergency atmospheric lockdown. Evacuate or seal biological suits immediately. Heavy blast doors slammed shut at the exits. The massive ventilation fans in the ceiling violently reversed direction, roaring like jet engines as they attempted to purge the atmosphere from the room. Chaos erupted on the Craxian side of the hall. The towering alien warriors did not panic. They were far too disciplined for that, but their response was absolute, terrifying military precision. Shields shimmered into existence, creating a massive, glowing blue dome over their ranks. Plasma lances ignited, filling the room with a deadly hum. General Vargas charged forward once more, stopping right at the edge of his energy shield, staring at the human table in absolute disbelief. "Black!" Vargas roared, his voice booming over the sirens. "Are you mad? We tolerated your liquid neurotoxin, but this is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. You have unleashed a localized corrosive acid. Shut down the deployment mechanism immediately." Akos put his hands in the air, equally confused by the base's sudden automated response. He looked at Chantel, who was holding the bottle of hot sauce, frozen mid-pour. "Sergeant, what exactly is in that bottle?" Akos asked, shouting over the alarm. "It's just hot sauce, Commander," Chantel shouted back defensively. "Just peppers and vinegar." Dr. Xylar, safely behind the Craxian energy shield, was tapping furiously at his datapad, his multifaceted eyes wide with sheer terror. "General! The compound. It is a highly concentrated alkylamide, specifically capsaicin. It is a chemical weapon. In our biology, it binds directly to the thermal nociceptors. It tricks the brain into believing the flesh is actively combusting. A localized incendiary weapon," Vargas bellowed. "Designed to burn the enemy from the inside out?" "Worse, General!" Xylar screamed over the klaxons. "It is an aerosolized irritant. It can blind, asphyxiate, and cause violent inflammatory shock. The environmental system is trying to scrub it, but the parts per million concentration near the human table is lethal. The humans are trapped in the epicenter." Akos pinched the bridge of his nose. "Computer," he called out to the base's AI, "cancel red alert. Reclassify the detected compound as an approved, non-hazardous nutritional additive. Authorization code Black Alpha Niner." The flashing red strobes ceased. The deafening alarms cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. The ventilation system slowly returned to its normal hum. Akos looked at Vargas, who was still safely tucked behind a heavy, military-grade energy shield, surrounded by 300 heavily armed warriors preparing for a chemical war. "General," Akos said, fighting the urge to sigh, "once again, this is not a weapon." "Do not insult my intelligence," Vargas snarled, refusing to lower the shield. "My science officer has identified the compound. It is a chemical designed to inflict agonizing pain and simulate death by fire. We utilize a synthesized version of that exact molecular structure to torture information out of Scourge operatives. It is a war crime to possess it in a localized dining facility." "It's not a weapon," Chantel repeated, her Texan drawl thick with annoyance. "Look." Before Akos or Diedrich could stop her, Chantel tilted the bottle and poured a massive, thick, crimson glob of the Carolina Reaper sauce directly onto her rubbery powdered eggs. The puddle of dark red liquid sat there, menacing and potent. Xylar gasped. "By the prophets! She is contaminating her own nutrient source with the corrosive agent." Chantel didn't hesitate. She scooped up a large forkful of the eggs, heavily saturated in the Reaper sauce, and shoved it into her mouth. The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Every single Craxian warrior stood completely paralyzed, their optical sensors dialed to maximum magnification, watching the human female. They expected her throat to melt. They expected her to drop to the floor in violent, agonizing convulsions. They expected her internal organs to hemorrhage. Chantel chewed. Her face turned a slight shade of pink. A small bead of sweat formed on her brow. She swallowed. She let out a sharp exhale, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Whew, that's got a kick to it. Damn good, though. Really masks the taste of the preservatives." She looked up at the wall of terrified, heavily armed alien warlords staring at her. "What? Do you guys want some? It goes great on poultry, if you have any." General Vargas slowly lowered the energy shield. His mandibles were twitching uncontrollably. You ingest liquid fire. It's just spicy, General, Chantel said, taking another massive bite. Peppers evolved this chemical so mammals wouldn't eat them. But humans kind of like the burn. Endorphin rush, you know? Endorphin rush, Vargas repeated, the words sounding hollow. He looked at Akos, who was still casually sipping his neurotoxic coffee, and then at Chantel, who was gleefully devouring a chemical weapon that would strip a Craxian's throat down to the cartilage. For the first time since the joint operation began, the Craxian general realized exactly why the High Council had allied with Earth. The humans did not need biological armor. They did not need venom glands or redundant organs. They were biological anomalies. They were monsters who woke up, drank lethal neurotoxins to cure their sleepiness, and covered their morning rations in agonizing chemical weapons just to feel a slight tingle of pleasure. Vargas turned to Xylar. Science officer, update the threat assessment matrix for the human species. To what level, General? Xylar squeaked, still staring at Chantel's empty plate. Maximum, Vargas whispered, looking at Akos with a profound, newfound respect and a deep, primal terror. If they do this to themselves for enjoyment, I do not want to imagine what they will do to the enemy. Klaxons shattered the tentative peace of the mess hall, but this time it was not an automated response to human condiments. The base's perimeter defense grid, a multi-billion-dollar array of Raytheon phase plasma turrets and motion trackers, had suddenly gone completely dark. The sudden loss of telemetry was followed by the unmistakable, bone-rattling thud of subterranean detonations. Dust fell from the titanium ceiling as the floor heaved upward. The mutual threat that had forced humanity and the Craxian ascendancy into this uneasy alliance had finally arrived. They were the Xyloch, a parasitic hive mind species that traveled through the deep crust of Groombridge 34, bypassing surface defenses by tunneling through solid bedrock. Breach in Sector 7, the automated AI voice shrieked over the intercom, all traces of its former calm synthetic tone replaced by urgent, staccato warnings. Multiple biological anomalies detected. Structural integrity compromised. Primary armory is offline. General Vargas did not hesitate. The paralyzing confusion he had experienced watching the humans consume their toxic breakfast evaporated, replaced instantly by cold, calculating martial programming. He barked a series of guttural clicks, and the Craxian warriors moved with terrifying synchronization. Their energy shields locked together, forming a phalanx of blue light, while their plasma lances hummed to lethal frequencies. "Commander Black!" Vargas roared over the din of crumbling rock. "The Xyloch have bypassed the outer wall. Fall back to the secondary command bunker. Your frail physiology will not survive a close-quarters swarm." Akos ignored the alien general. The caffeine from the dark roast was currently singing through his veins, his heart pumping an accelerated, rhythmic beat that banished all lingering fatigue. He drew his Smith & Wesson M&P standard-issue sidearm, checking the charge on his magnetic holsters. "Sergeant Atwood, Dr. Kim," Akos commanded, his voice steady. "We aren't falling back. If they take the armory, they disable our heavy munitions. We hold the primary corridor." Chantel wiped a lingering speck of red-hot capsaicin sauce from her chin, a wild, almost feral grin spreading across her face. The endorphin rush from the Carolina Reaper pepper was at its peak, flushing her skin and dilating her pupils. She hoisted her heavy pulse rifle, the metal clanking against her chest plate. "Copy that, Commander. I was just looking for a way to burn off these calories anyway." Diedrich unholstered his medical scanner and a compact submachine gun. "Statistically speaking, this is a terrible idea, Akos, but my cortisol levels are already peaked, so lead the way." The human trio sprinted out of the mess hall, bypassing the retreating auxiliary units and heading straight for the epicenter of the breach. As they rounded the corner into Sector 7, the true horror of the Xyloch assault became apparent. The corridor was swarming with them. The creatures were nightmarish amalgams of pale, blind flesh and razor-sharp obsidian claws, the size of large dogs, but moving with the erratic, terrifying speed of rabid insects. They were pouring out of a massive, jagged crater in the floor, their screeching echoing off the metal walls. The Craxian vanguard had already engaged. Vargas and his elite guards were holding a choke point, their plasma lances slicing through the pale creatures with brutal efficiency. However, the Xylok were not just beasts, they were biological engineers. From the center of the subterranean crater, a massive, bulbous Xylok queen cast emerged. Its translucent thorax pulsed with sickly yellow light. Suddenly, it unleashed a massive cloud of dense, yellow spores directly into the corridor's ventilation circulation. "Toxin warning!" Xylar screamed from behind the front line, frantically analyzing the air. "General! It is a paralyzing neurodepressant!" It targets the central nervous system, forcing instantaneous muscular flaccidity. Before Vargas could order a retreat, the yellow cloud enveloped the Craxian front line. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The towering alien warlords, conquerors of a dozen worlds, began to collapse like severed marionettes. Their heavy chitinous armor crashed against the grated floor. Their biology, hyper-tuned to external stimuli, absorbed the depressant gas with zero resistance. Even General Vargas stumbled to his knees, his massive mandibles locking up, his multifaceted eyes wide with helpless rage as his limbs went entirely numb. The Xylok swarm shrieked in triumph, preparing to tear the paralyzed Craxians apart. Then, the humans arrived. Akos, Chantel, and Diedrich hit the corridor, running directly into the thick of the yellow neurodepressant gas. Xylar, watching from a sealed surveillance feed in the rear, gasped in absolute horror. He expected the frail Deathworlders to drop instantly, their primitive respiratory systems overwhelmed by the alien chemical weapon. Instead, Akos coughed once, waved the yellow smoke away from his face, and opened fire. The staccato crack of human kinetic weaponry echoed down the hall. Unlike the humming plasma lances of the Craxians, human guns were loud, primitive, and violently kinetic. Armor-piercing rounds tore through the pale flesh of the Xylok, spraying acidic blood across the bulkheads. "Commander, this gas smells like cheap sulfur and dirty socks," Chantel yelled over the gunfire, slamming a fresh magazine into her rifle. She stepped directly over the paralyzed body of General Vargas, planting her heavy combat boots on either side of the massive alien to shield him from the swarm. "Keep your breathing shallow, Sergeant," Akos ordered, dropping 3 Xylok with precise shots to their cranial ridges. To the Craxians, it was a physical impossibility. The human nervous system should have been completely shut down. Yet, Akos and his team were moving with hyperkinetic speed, their reaction times seemingly enhanced rather than dampened. Diedrich ducked behind a structural pillar, analyzing a sample of the gas with his medical scanner while blindly firing his submachine gun with one hand. "Akos, the gas is a heavy adenosine receptor antagonist. It's designed to forcibly induce chemical sleep by flooding the brain's fatigue centers." "Why aren't we dropping, Doc?" Chantel screamed, kicking a leaping Xylok back into the crater. "Because we are already running on a massive overdose of 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, Diedrich shouted back with frantic, triumphant realization. "The caffeine from the coffee. It violently blocks the exact same receptors this gas is trying to target. Our brains literally can't process the paralyzing agent because they are too busy processing the earth stimulants." Xylar, listening over the comms, fell back against the wall, his scientific worldview shattering into pieces. The lethal neurotoxin the humans had casually consumed for breakfast was acting as a perfect, aggressive chemical shield against an alien biological weapon. "They are immune," Xylar whispered to himself, watching the tactical feed. "The Deathworlders pre-poisoned themselves to prevent external poisoning. It is sheer biological madness." Despite their chemical immunity, the math was rapidly turning against the humans. For every Xylok they gunned down, 3 more crawled out of the subterranean breach. Akos' sidearm clicked empty, and he smoothly transitioned to a combat knife, burying it into the neck of a creature trying to flank Chantel. "We can't hold them forever, Commander," Chantel yelled, her pulse rifle glowing red-hot from sustained automatic fire. "There's too many!" "We need area denial, or they are going to overrun the paralyzed Craxians and breach the command center." Akos assessed the grim situation. The armory was still locked down. The heavy incendiary grenades they needed were behind 3 feet of reinforced steel. They had kinetic weapons and whatever was left on their tactical webbing. His eyes darted to the heavy environmental scrubber unit positioned directly above the subterranean crater. It was part of the base's high-capacity HVAC system, designed to cycle air through the lower levels. "Sergeant Atwood," Akos barked, slicing the throat of another beast. "That hot sauce? Do you still have the bottle?" Chantel blinked, her adrenaline-fueled mind taking a fraction of a second to catch up. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out the small glass bottle of Smokin' Ed's Carolina Reaper sauce. "Yeah, I didn't finish it. Dr. Kim!" Akos yelled over the screeching swarm. "What would happen if we aerosolized a pure dose of 2 million Scoville units directly into the Xyloc hive?" Diedrich's eyes widened behind his glasses. He looked at the pale, subterranean creatures, possessing highly sensitive olfactory and thermal receptors, designed for navigating pitch-black tunnels. Akos, to them, it wouldn't just be an irritant. It would feel like inhaling liquid plasma. It would overwhelm their sensory organs and induce mass neurological panic. "Good enough for me," Akos said. "Sergeant, give me the bottle." "Doc, cover us." Akos grabbed the bottle of Reaper sauce from Chantel's hand. "Covering fire. Push them back to the edge of the pit." Inside was the massive, spinning turbine of the ventilation intake, designed to push air down into the lower sublevels, exactly where the Xyloc were coming from. Akos unscrewed the black plastic cap of the hot sauce. He didn't pour it. He smashed the entire glass bottle directly against the spinning metal blades of the turbine. The thick, crimson capsaicin oil shattered, instantly vaporizing as it hit the high-speed fan. The scrubber caught the aerosolized weapon, multiplied its dispersion matrix, and fired it directly down into the subterranean breach. For 2 excruciating seconds, nothing happened. Then, the true power of a Class 9 Deathworld culinary condiment was unleashed. The reaction from the Xyloc swarm was not just painful, it was apocalyptic. The pale creatures stopped their advance immediately, dropping their weapons and clawing violently at their own faces. The highly concentrated capsaicin gas bonded instantly with their hypersensitive respiratory tracts. To a human, it was a spicy meal. To the subterranean aliens, it was an invisible, unquenchable fire burning their nervous systems from the inside out. A deafening collective shriek of absolute agony echoed from the crater. The Xyloc Queen, exposed to the highest concentration of the aerosolized Reaper sauce, thrashed wildly, her biological defenses completely useless against the distilled earth pepper. Panic overtook the hive mind. The biological imperative to flee from fire overrode all combat programming. The Xyloc swarm reversed direction, pouring back down into the jagged crater, retreating into the deep crust of the planet to escape the invisible burning hell the humans had unleashed. Within 90 seconds, the corridor was empty of threats, save for the twitching bodies of the fallen. The ventilation system continued to hum, slowly scrubbing the yellow neurodepressant gas from the air. As the alien toxin dissipated, General Vargas and his Craxian warriors began to regain motor function. Vargas pushed himself off the grated floor, his massive limbs trembling as his biology rebooted. He looked around the carnage. Dozens of Xyloc lay dead, but the vast majority of the swarm had simply fled in terror. He looked down at Sergeant Chantel Atwood, who was leaning against a bulkhead, casually wiping sweat from her forehead, her rifle slung over her shoulder. He looked at Akos Black, who was standing near the ventilation shaft, the faint smell of vinegar and aggressive peppers lingering around him. Xylar rushed forward, his datapad beeping wildly. "General! General! The humans!" They used their breakfast condiment. They weaponized the localized incendiary chemical. The Xyloc sensory organs were completely decimated by the exposure. Vargas slowly stood to his full 9-foot height. He did not issue a command. He did not boast of Craxian superiority. Instead, the supreme commander of the Craxian vanguard stepped in front of Commander Akos Black, crossed his massive forearms over his chest, and bowed his head, the highest honor a Craxian warlord could bestow, reserved only for apex predators. "Commander Black," Vargas said, his booming voice remarkably subdued, "you and your soldiers willingly ingest neurotoxins that render you immune to chemical warfare. You flavor your sustenance with localized incendiaries that can rout a subterranean hive. The High Council was wrong to call you auxiliaries." Akos offered a tired, genuine smile, holstering his empty sidearm. "We do what we have to do to survive, General. Earth is a tough neighborhood." "Indeed," Vargas rumbled, his mandibles clicking in absolute reverence. "From this solar cycle forward, the Craxian ascendancy will not march ahead of humanity. We will march beside you." The alien general paused, looking nervously at the shattered remains of the hot sauce bottle near the vent. "Provided, of course, that you never deploy your breakfast rations against our formations." Chantel laughed, a bright, triumphant sound in the grim corridor. "Don't worry, General. We only bring out the spicy stuff for special occasions. But if you're good, I might let you try a drop on your protein cubes tomorrow." Vargas physically shuddered, taking a step back. "I would sooner bathe in the core of a dying star, Sergeant." As the base began the grueling process of cleanup and repair, the dynamic of forward operating base Bastion shifted permanently. The Craxians no longer looked at the humans as frail, soft creatures. They looked at them with a profound, healthy terror. They watched them in the mess hall, marveling at the chemical resilience of a species that conquered their fatigue with poison and celebrated their victories with fire. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the galaxy, the extraterrestrial warlords had finally learned a universal truth. Never, under any circumstances, get between a human and their morning coffee. Are you ready to join the ranks of the Deathworlders? If you enjoyed this pulse-pounding tale of human resilience, chemical warfare, and the galaxy's most dangerous breakfast, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow Apex Predators, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more epic sci-fi storytelling where humanity shows the cosmos exactly what we are made of. Stay caffeinated, stay spicy, and keep surviving out there in the stars.